He woke up before the alarm, as he often did, staring at the cracked ceiling of his small room. Morning light slipped through the thin curtain, landing softly on the wall like it was unsure whether it was welcome. The room was quiet, but his mind was already loud. Thoughts about money, work, family duties, and unfinished dreams crowded in before his feet even touched the floor. He moved slowly, careful not to make noise. The house was old, and every step complained if taken too fast. In the kitchen, he filled a chipped cup with tea and stood near the window while it cooled. Outside, the street was waking up. A shopkeeper pulled up a metal shutter. A stray dog stretched and yawned. Life moved on, steady and uncaring, the same way it always had. He was known as a responsible man. That word followed him everywhere. At work, people trusted him because he never argued and never said no. At home, family depended on him because he always adjusted. Somewhere along the way, being dependable replaced being happy. No one noticed when he stopped laughing loudly or when his dreams became smaller and quieter. His job was not bad, but it was heavy. Long hours, small pay, and constant pressure. He sat behind a desk most of the day, handling tasks that felt important to others but meaningless to him. He watched time pass through the office window, counting hours instead of moments. Sometimes he imagined walking out and never coming back. But responsibility always pulled him back in. People around him talked about love, plans, weddings, and future homes. He listened with a polite smile, nodding at the right times. Inside, he felt like a visitor in someone else's life. His own story felt paused, like a book left open on the same page for years. That evening, after another long day, he chose to walk instead of taking the bus. The air felt heavy, but walking helped him breathe. Streetlights flickered on one by one, and the road filled with familiar sounds. Vendors called out prices, motorbikes rushed past, and laughter floated from small tea stalls as he walked. His eyes fell on a flower seller sitting near the corner of the road. The seller was old, his hands rough, his clothes faded. A small basket of roses sat beside him. Red, slightly wilted, but still beautiful in a quiet way. People passed without stopping. Flowers were a luxury for celebrations, not for tired weekdays. He slowed his steps. He did not know why. He had no plan to buy anything. He was not meeting anyone. Yet something pulled him closer, like a thought he had been avoiding. He asked the price of one rose. Just one. The seller looked surprised, then smiled gently. The exchange was simple. A few coins, a single rose, nothing more. The rose rested awkwardly in his hand as he continued walking, unsure what to do with it. Holding it felt strange. He could not remember the last time he had bought flowers. Maybe he never had. He thought of giving it to someone at home, then stopped. There was no special reason, no right moment. He almost threw it away, feeling foolish instead. He kept walking. At a building he passed every day, he noticed her standing near the entrance. She was waiting for a ride, holding a bag close to her side. They had seen each other before in passing, exchanged small, polite nods, nothing more. She looked tired, the kind of tired that sleep does not fix. He stood a few steps away, unsure. His heart beat faster for no clear reason. This was not romance, not courage, not a plan. It was just a moment that refused to pass. Before he could overthink it, he stepped forward and held out the rose. His voice came out low and uneven. He said it was nothing. Just a flower. No reason. She looked confused at first, then surprised. Her eyes moved from the rose to his face, searching for meaning. He had none to offer. His hands trembled slightly. He felt exposed, like he had given away something personal without knowing why. Slowly, she accepted it. Her fingers brushed the stem. She smiled, not wide, not dramatic, but real. That smile did something to him. It softened a place inside that had been tight for a long time. She thanked him quietly. No questions. No assumptions. Just a simple thank you. The moment lasted only seconds, but it stayed with him as he walked away. That night, he replayed the scene again and again. He did not know why it mattered so much. It was just a rose, just a smile. Yet his chest felt lighter, like he had let go of something he did not know he was carrying. Over the next few days, life returned to routine, but something was different. He noticed small things more: the sound of rain on the roof, the taste of morning tea, the way people's faces changed when they felt seen. When he passed the same building again, he saw her once more. This time, she smiled first. Not because of the rose, but because they shared a moment that belonged only to them. They exchanged a few words. Simple ones. About the weather, about work. Nothing deep. Yet it felt important. He realized how rare kindness had become in his own life. Not kindness given out of duty, but kindness chosen freely. That single rose was not about flowers or attraction. It was about being human in a world that rushed past feelings. He did not suddenly become happy. His problems did not disappear. Bills still waited. Work was still tiring. But something inside him had shifted. He felt less invisible to himself. At night, he lay awake thinking about how one small action had changed the shape of his day. He wondered how many moments he had ignored before, waiting for the perfect time to feel alive. The rose had already wilted by the next day, but its effect remained. It stayed in his thoughts, reminding him that even a quiet life could hold meaning, that even someone like him, ordinary and tired, could create a moment that mattered. He did not know where this path would lead. He did not expect anything. For the first time in a long while, he was not planning the future or fearing it. He was simply present, and that was where everything truly began. The next morning felt different, even though nothing around him had changed. The same ceiling, the same curtain, the same noise from the street. Yet when he opened his eyes, there was a calmness he was not used to. He stayed in bed for a few extra moments, thinking about the smile, the rose, and how a few seconds had followed him into sleep. At work, his routine stayed the same. He reached his desk on time, greeted people politely, and started clearing tasks. But now and then, his mind drifted. Not in a careless way, but in a gentle one. He found himself wondering how her day had gone, whether the rose had made it home safely, or if it had simply been left on a table somewhere. He told himself not to read too much into it. It was nothing, after all. Just a kind act between two strangers who were barely strangers. Still, when evening came, he walked the same route again, without realizing he had chosen it. She was there that day too, standing near the building, scrolling on her phone. When she looked up and noticed him, her face changed slightly, like someone recognizing a familiar sound. She smiled again. This time it felt easier, less surprising. They exchanged a greeting. Simple words. Nothing forced. He asked how her day was. She answered honestly, saying it had been long. He nodded, understanding without asking for details. Silence followed, but it was not uncomfortable. They stood there for a few minutes, talking about small things: traffic, weather, the food from a nearby stall. It was ordinary conversation, yet it felt different because neither of them was pretending to be more than they were. She mentioned she worked nearby and often waited for her ride there. He said he passed this road every day. That was all. No deep stories. No questions that crossed boundaries. As days passed, these short meetings became part of his routine. Not daily, but often enough to be noticed. Sometimes they spoke for a few minutes. Sometimes just a smile and a nod. Each time, he felt a quiet warmth settle in his chest. He learned little things about her through these moments. She preferred listening more than speaking. She laughed softly, like she was careful not to disturb the air around her. She carried herself with strength, but there was tiredness in her eyes, the kind that comes from carrying life alone for too long. She noticed things about him too. How he always stood slightly to the side, giving space. How he listened without interrupting. How his words were few but honest. One evening, rain surprised them. It started suddenly, heavy and loud. People rushed for cover. They stayed where they were, pressed against the building wall. He offered to share his umbrella, then realized he did not have one. She laughed quietly, and the sound made him smile. They waited together until the rain slowed. During that time, silence returned, but it felt deeper now, like a shared understanding. When her ride arrived, She hesitated for a moment before leaving. She thanked him again, this time not for the rose, but for staying. That night, he thought about how connection does not always arrive with noise or drama. Sometimes it comes quietly, sitting beside you while the rain falls. At home, his family noticed small changes. He seemed lighter. He spoke a little more during dinner. He listened with patience that did not feel forced. No one knew the reason, and he did not explain. He was careful not to build expectations. Life had taught him that hope can be heavy. Still, something was growing, slow and steady. One evening, she did not show up. He told himself it was normal. People had lives. The next day, she was not there either. A strange emptiness followed him during his walk home. On the third day, he saw her again. She looked more tired than usual. Her smile was weaker. He asked if she was okay. She paused before answering, then said she had been dealing with some things. He did not push. He simply listened as she spoke, slowly and carefully, about responsibilities, family pressure, and feeling like she was always expected to be strong. Her words were not dramatic. They were quiet and honest, which made them heavier. He did not offer advice. He did not try to fix anything. He told her she was not wrong for feeling tired, that sometimes carrying everything alone becomes too much. Her eyes filled slightly, but she did not cry. She thanked him, not with words this time, but with a look that held relief. From that moment, their connection changed. It deepened, not because of romance, but because of trust. They began sharing small pieces of their lives, not all at once. Just enough. He told her about his work, his sense of being stuck, his fear of disappointing people. She listened the same way he did, quietly and fully. They began to look forward to seeing each other, even if neither said it aloud. Their conversations stayed simple, but their presence became important. He realized that the rose had been an opening. But it was this honesty that kept the door open. Kindness had turned into understanding. Life around them continued as usual. Noise, pressure, and responsibilities did not disappear. But within that, they had created a small space where they could breathe. One evening, as they parted ways, she held the door for a moment longer than usual. She told him that day with the rose had come at a time when she felt invisible. He did not know what to say. He only told her he was glad it mattered. As he walked home, he understood something important. Sometimes people do not need big promises or dramatic love. Sometimes they just need to be seen, and without realizing it. He had found someone who saw him too. Days turned into weeks, and their small encounters began to shape their lives in ways neither expected. Each time they met, there was an unspoken comfort in their presence. They did not need to fill the silence with chatter. Sitting or standing together in those brief moments, they felt a quiet understanding that had been missing from both their lives for a long time. He started noticing little things in his own life. He paid more attention to the way people treated each other at work, noticing small acts of kindness he had ignored before. He smiled more easily, laughed more openly, and found that his burdens felt lighter simply because someone had shown him that small gestures matter. She too seemed to change. She walked with a little more confidence, laughed a little more freely. It was subtle, but he saw it in the way she carried herself. Her tired eyes were still there, but now they held a quiet spark. A sign that the small connection they shared was helping her cope with life's pressures. One evening, as they met near the building, he brought something for her, though he almost did not. It was nothing fancy, a small notebook he had found at a market. He remembered her saying she liked to write, even if only small thoughts or reminders to herself. He handed it to her awkwardly, unsure if it would be received well. She looked at it, surprise flashing in her eyes. Then she smiled, a soft, grateful smile, and took it from him. They did not speak much, just exchanged quiet thanks. But the notebook became a symbol of their growing understanding, an unspoken promise that they noticed each other, that they cared. Even in small ways, life continued around them, unpredictable and relentless. Work demanded attention. Family expected answers. Friends wanted time. Yet these few minutes of connection offered a sanctuary, a place where both could pause and just be. One rainy afternoon, he noticed she was struggling with a heavy bag. Without thinking, he offered to carry it. She hesitated, then let him, and for a short walk, the weight of her things shifted from her shoulders to his. The act was simple, almost mundane, yet it spoke volumes. It told her he cared, not just for a moment, but in the small, everyday realities of life. They began to meet more often, sometimes deliberately, sometimes by chance. Every meeting felt like a small oasis in the chaos of their lives. They shared tiny moments, a laugh over a misheard word, a look exchanged over a shared memory, a comforting silence when words were not enough. Through these moments, they began to share pieces of their past. He told her about his childhood, about how he had always felt responsible for everything and everyone, how that sense of duty often left him feeling alone. She listened without judgment, understanding without needing to fix anything. She spoke of her own life, of the expectations placed upon her, the loneliness she sometimes felt, and the dreams she had set aside to survive. Each story was shared carefully, like a fragile piece of glass, but it deepened their trust. They realized that their bond was growing not from grand gestures, but from mutual understanding and empathy. The rose, the notebook, the shared moments, they became anchors. Reminders that someone cared, that someone saw them. Neither expected anything beyond that. They did not speak of love, not yet. It was enough to know that they were no longer invisible to another person. One day he noticed her struggling more than usual. Her steps were slower, her smile faint. He asked if she was all right. She hesitated, then admitted that life had become overwhelming. Her workload had increased, and family pressures were pressing in. She felt like she was drowning, barely keeping her head above water. He did not offer solutions. He did not tell her to ignore responsibilities. Instead, he simply listened. He let her speak until her voice was calm. He said nothing more than, "It's okay to feel tired. You are doing enough." Those words, so simple, carried more weight than anything he could have done otherwise. Over the following weeks, they found ways to support each other. A shared cup of tea during a break. A few encouraging words sent over a message. A smile exchanged from across the street. Each act was small, but together they formed a network of care that neither had realized they were missing. He began to notice that he looked forward to these moments more than anything else. The busy life, the long hours, the responsibilities, they all seemed lighter when he knew she would be there. And she, too, began to feel a quiet strength. She could face her challenges with a little more courage, knowing that someone understood her without judgment. Life was not perfect. Arguments, frustrations, and setbacks continued. They disagreed on small things, and sometimes their days did not align. Yet each disagreement was met with patience and respect. They had learned that the bond they shared was stronger than temporary irritation or misunderstandings. They began to notice how the world around them responded to their small kindnesses. Colleagues smiled more readily, strangers offered polite gestures, and even the city seemed a little less harsh. It was a reminder that small actions ripple outward, often in ways that are unseen but deeply felt. One evening, as they walked together under the soft glow of streetlights, he realized that the rose had done more than open a door. It had taught him to see, to notice, to care without expectation. And she, in turn, had reminded him that vulnerability was not weakness, but a pathway to connection. They stopped near a quiet park. The air was cool, filled with the scent of damp earth and leaves. She paused, looking at the empty benches, and said softly, "Sometimes I forget that life can be gentle." He nodded. "It can be if you let it." They stood in silence, watching the world move around them. No words were needed. The presence of another person, someone who truly saw you, was enough. It was a quiet hope, a steady warmth that neither had expected but both had found. That night, he went home and lay awake, thinking about the changes that a single rose had brought into his life. Not the flower itself, but the courage it had sparked. Courage to notice. Courage to care. Courage to be present. She, too, reflected on their growing bond. She had felt invisible for so long, But now there was someone who recognized her, not for what she could do, but for who she was. That recognition, simple as it was, had shifted something deep inside. Their days continued, filled with ordinary tasks, small struggles, and tiny victories. And yet, through it all, a quiet thread of connection ran between them. It was invisible, unspoken, yet undeniable. They did not need to define it. They did not need to label it. It simply existed, strengthening with each shared glance, each kind word, each small act of presence. The rose had been the first step, but the true journey had just begun. In noticing each other, in caring without expectation, they had found something rare, a connection that could survive the ordinary, the difficult, and the everyday challenges that life would inevitably bring. And in that connection, they discovered that even the smallest gestures could have the power to transform lives. Life has a way of testing even the strongest connections, and theirs was no exception. In the days following their quiet bond, circumstances began to pull at them in unexpected ways. Work became more demanding. Responsibilities at home grew heavier. Friends called, and obligations demanded attention. What had been simple and steady suddenly felt fragile. One morning, he woke to find that a project at work had escalated. Deadlines compressed, clients pressed, and his manager expected him to carry more than his usual share. He felt the familiar weight settle on his shoulders, the kind of weight that pressed down silently but heavily. He thought of her, wishing he could share even a few minutes of comfort. But the day offered no space. She too faced pressures that seemed relentless. A family situation required her immediate attention. A decision she had avoided for months now demanded action. She felt torn between duty and desire, responsibility and relief. For a moment she envied his life for its simplicity, even though she knew it was no easier. Their brief meetings became rare. Days passed without a single word exchanged. When they did meet, it was rushed, hurried, a glance here and there, a nod to acknowledge each other. The warmth they had shared felt diluted by distance and obligation. One afternoon, as he walked through the familiar street, he saw her at a distance. She seemed distracted, her eyes scanning her surroundings, her hands busy with papers and phone calls. He wanted to approach, to offer the small comfort of a smile or a word. But she looked absorbed in a world where he could not enter. He stopped for a moment, watching her. He realized how much he had come to depend on these small moments of connection. He felt the absence sharply, like a missing piece of his daily rhythm. He knew she must feel it too, though he could not be certain. Later that week, they had a chance encounter at a cafe. He was grabbing a quick coffee. She was there to meet someone. Their eyes met across the room, and there was a flicker of recognition. A smile appeared, hesitant and small, as if testing the waters. They exchanged a few words about the weather, a brief comment about the cafe's crowdedness. It was polite, controlled, and fleeting. Afterward, he walked home with a heavy feeling in his chest. The simple, natural bond they had built felt threatened by life's pressures. He wondered if the small gestures that had brought them together could survive the weight of reality. He realized that connection required not just presence, but effort, and that effort was becoming harder to maintain. She too reflected on the day's encounter. She had felt the comfort of seeing him, even if briefly, yet a part of her wondered if life's responsibilities would always keep them apart. She thought of the rose, how small and fragile it had seemed, and how that same fragility could mirror their current situation. Despite the distance and distractions, they both continued to notice each other in subtle ways. A shared glance across the street, a brief nod in a crowded room, a small smile when paths crossed unexpectedly. These tiny gestures reminded them that the connection had not vanished. Even if it was strained, one rainy evening, fate intervened. Both had arrived at the same bus stop, caught in an unexpected downpour. Neither had an umbrella, and the rain fell heavily, soaking their clothes. For a moment, they stood apart, hesitant, unsure if the other would acknowledge them in the chaos. He stepped forward, offering his jacket to shield her from the rain. She hesitated, then accepted, draping it over her shoulders. They stood together, sharing the small warmth, the protective space. In that moment, the pressures of work, family, and obligations seemed to pause, placed by a quiet understanding. They spoke briefly, softly, about the sudden rain, about needing to get home safely. No grand declarations, no promises, just presence. And yet, in those simple words and actions, they found the essence of what had always drawn them together. It was not grand gestures or constant attention, but the willingness to be there when it mattered most. That night, I reflected on how life tests connections. It was easy to be kind when days were calm and routines steady. The real challenge was maintaining empathy and care when life demanded so much. He realized that true bonds are resilient, but they require conscious effort, especially in a world that constantly pulls people in different directions. She, too, lay awake thinking about the evening. The jacket, the shared moment, the simple carrot reminded her that even when life feels overwhelming, small acts of understanding can anchor the soul. She understood that connection was not measured in frequency or grand gestures, but in consistency and attention, even when life became heavy. Over the next few days, they began to find ways to reconnect, small as they were. A message to check in, a shared tea during a rare free moment, a short walk together in the evening. Each effort required courage, focus, and prioritization. But with each small step, the bond strengthened, proving that even under pressure, relationships built on genuine care could endure. They learned to navigate the challenges of life together, acknowledging that responsibilities would always exist. Yet, by choosing to notice, to be present, and to act with intention, they preserved the connection that had grown from something as simple as a single rose. He began to understand that love, or care, was not always about grand declarations. It was about showing up, listening, and finding time for someone even when life made it difficult. She realized the same truth, that being seen, being acknowledged, and being cared for in subtle ways could provide immense strength in moments of struggle. One evening, as they parted ways after a short walk, they exchanged a look that said more than words could convey. It was an acknowledgement of the challenges they faced, and a quiet promise that they would continue to try, to notice, to care, despite life's interruptions. That night, he went home and sat quietly in his room. The day had been exhausting, filled with work pressures and obligations, yet the brief moments of connection had made it worthwhile. He realized that resilience in life was not just about enduring tasks and responsibilities, but also about maintaining bonds that brought meaning, warmth, and hope. She too reflected on the day. Amid the chaos and pressure, she felt gratitude for the small gestures, for the shared moments, and for the understanding that someone was truly there for her. She understood that connection was fragile, yet strong enough to withstand life's tests when nurtured with care. As days passed, they continued to find small ways to support each other, even in the face of demands and pressures. A shared smile, a few words of encouragement, a small act of kindness when it was least expected. Each moment reinforced the bond, showing that genuine connection could survive even the heaviest of life's burdens. Through this journey, they both realized the power of noticing, of showing care, and of maintaining presence. The rose, once a simple gesture, had opened the door. Life's tests had made them understand that sustaining a bond required effort, patience, and intentionality. And in learning this, they found strength, warmth, and hope that neither had known before. The days passed, each one carrying its own share of work, responsibilities, and small victories. Yet the bond they had built continued to grow quietly, resiliently, like a seed pushing through soil toward sunlight. Each small interaction, every shared smile, every moment of understanding became a thread weaving, a connection that neither of them wanted to break. One afternoon, he noticed her standing near the building again, waiting for someone. Though her eyes seemed distant, thoughtful, she looked tired, as if life had pressed too hard in the previous days. He approached cautiously, unsure if she wanted company. Yet he felt compelled to stay nearby. She saw him and smiled faintly, a small acknowledgement that still carried warmth. He greeted her simply, asking how she had been. She hesitated, then admitted that the week had been challenging. Responsibilities at work had piled up, family matters were demanding, and she had felt alone in handling everything. He listened carefully, without interruption or advice. His presence alone seemed to matter, and she seemed to relax slightly as she spoke. When she finished, he said quietly, "You are doing more than you realize. It's okay to take a moment for yourself." She looked at him, a sense of relief washing over her. It was not the words themselves, but the acknowledgement that someone understood, someone noticed. The rose, the notebook, the small acts of kindness, they had built this silent foundation of trust. And it showed in this shared moment. Over the next few weeks, they continued to meet, each encounter strengthening the quiet bond they shared. They did not force long conversations or grand gestures. A few words, a shared laugh, a brief walk, or a simple cup of tea became enough. It was not about quantity, but the quality of presence. One evening, after a long day of work, they found themselves walking together along a quiet street. Streetlights flickered on, casting soft glows on the pavement. The city was alive with noise, but they seemed wrapped in a bubble of calm. They spoke about ordinary things, food, the weather, small observations, but each word carried a weight of care. He noticed how she had grown more open, more comfortable in sharing small pieces of her life. She, in turn, observed his patience, his attention to detail, and his willingness to listen without judgment. These qualities, simple as they were, formed the core of a connection that neither had fully expected, but both valued deeply. One day, they decided to take a longer walk in a nearby park. The air was fresh, carrying the scent of grass and flowers, a reminder that the world could still hold beauty amidst chaos. They found a quiet bench and sat together, watching the trees sway gently with the wind. Silence filled the space, but it was a comforting silence, one that allowed them to simply be with each other. She turned slightly toward him and said softly, "I sometimes forget that small things can make a difference. That noticing, being kind, and caring it really matters." He nodded, understanding fully. It does. Even the smallest gestures can change someone's day, sometimes their life. They sat in silence for a while, letting the words settle, letting the presence of another person provide a quiet strength. It was not dramatic or urgent, yet it was profound in its simplicity. Later, as they walked back toward the streets filled with cars and people, they realized that their connection had become a part of their daily lives, not in the sense of dependency, but as a constant thread, a reminder that human connection, however small, could offer comfort and hope in ways nothing else could. Days turned into weeks, and they faced life's pressures together, even if not physically side by side. A message to check in, a small gesture of support, a smile exchanged across a room. These simple actions became a language of care, a way of saying, "I see you. I understand you. You matter." One evening, he bought another rose. This time, not as a grand gesture or to impress, but simply as a reminder. He handed it to her as they met near the building. She looked surprised, then smiled, taking it gently. It was not about romance or expectation, but about acknowledging the quiet impact that small acts could carry. They walked together, talking about everyday things, letting the rose rest between them as a symbol of connection and care. Life continued with its challenges, but the presence of another person, someone who noticed and understood, made the difficulties lighter. The days brighter. As the months went by, they realized that what had started with a single rose had grown into something far more significant. It was not the flower itself, but the courage it had sparked, the courage to notice, to care, and to show up. It had taught them that meaningful connections do not need grand gestures. They require consistency, empathy, and attention. He reflected on his own life, recognizing how much had changed. The weight he had carried alone now felt lighter because he knew someone understood him. He smiled more freely, laughed more often, and allowed himself to enjoy small moments without guilt. Life was still busy and full of responsibilities, but it had gained a layer of meaning that had been missing. She, too, experienced a shift. The pressures of life remained, but she found strength in knowing she was not alone. The simple presence of someone who cared allowed her to face challenges with a little more courage. She could smile more easily, breathe more deeply, and appreciate the small joys that life offered. One evening, as they parted after a short walk, they paused for a moment. The streetlights cast long shadows, and the city hummed softly around them. They looked at each other, not needing words to convey the depth of understanding between them. The bond they had built was quiet, strong, and enduring. He walked home feeling a warmth that had been missing from his life for a long time. The connection they shared was not dependent on constant attention or grand events. It was built on presence, care, and empathy, and that realization filled him with a quiet joy. She, too, returned home with a sense of peace. The small gestures, the shared moments, the understanding they offered each other, it had become a lifeline. She understood now that life's challenges could be softened by genuine human connection. As time passed, they continued their simple routines, their lives intertwined in subtle ways. They did not need to label their relationship or define it. It existed as a quiet force, a reminder that even small acts like giving a single rose could create ripples of kindness, understanding, and hope. Looking back, they both recognized that the rose had been the starting point, the gentle spark that had awakened them to the importance of noticing, caring, and being present. What followed was far more profound, a bond that had grown through patience, empathy, and shared humanity. In the end, they realized that one rose had indeed been all it took, not to change the world, not to solve every problem, but to remind people that life, with all its struggles and responsibilities, could still hold beauty, kindness, and quiet moments of connection. And those moments, simple as they were, had the power to transform lives forever. Months had passed since that first rose had been exchanged, and their bond had grown stronger, subtle but unbreakable. Life continued its endless rhythm, filled with responsibilities, challenges, and ordinary moments. Yet, amidst the ordinary, it discovered something extraordinary, a connection rooted in understanding, empathy, and quiet care. One morning, he woke early as usual. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft glow across the streets. He felt a sense of anticipation, a quiet excitement that did not belong to any grand event, but to the thought of seeing her. Their daily routines often aligned now, though life still demanded careful planning. Even the smallest encounters had become anchors for both of them. She began her day with a lightness she had not felt in a long time. Life was still busy, still pressing, but knowing that someone noticed her, cared for her, and understood her struggles brought comfort. She no longer felt the weight of solitude as heavily. Their connection had become a source of strength and calm. That afternoon, they met near the building as usual. They walked together without a specific destination, allowing the streets, the park, and the small cafes to guide them. Conversation flowed naturally about work, about the small surprises of life, about the things that mattered to neither, but were fun to share anyway. He noticed the little changes in her. How her eyes brightened when she talked about a favorite book, how her laughter came more freely, how her posture relaxed when she felt heard. She, in turn, observed him with the same attentiveness, noticing how he had grown more open, more confident, and more willing to share the small joys of life. One evening, as they found a quiet bench in the park, she spoke softly about her dreams. Not the ones weighed down by responsibility, but the ones she had once hidden away. She described small ambitions, learning a skill she had postponed, visiting a place she had only imagined, simply finding moments of peace. He listened with quiet encouragement, offering no judgment, just understanding. He shared some of his own aspirations, dreams he had shelved because life seemed too heavy. Speaking aloud felt strange, almost vulnerable, yet her presence made it safe. They realized that the bond they had built was not just about noticing each other, but about allowing each other to rediscover parts of themselves they had long neglected. Life, however, continued to test them. Unexpected challenges arose. work complications, family emergencies, and personal dilemmas. Sometimes they had to go days without seeing each other, yet, even in absence, their connection endured. Messages, small gestures, and thoughts of each other sustained the thread that had begun with a simple rose. One day he received news that a close family member was ill. The weight of worry threatened to consume him. He went to her, seeking nothing but a listening ear. She offered her presence, her quiet support, and the reassurance that he did not have to face everything alone. No advice, no solutions, just the power of being there. This pattern continued in both directions. She faced a personal challenge and he was there, not with grand solutions, but with attention, patience, and understanding. Their bond was tested repeatedly, yet each test only strengthened it. They discovered that genuine care could survive distance, pressure, and life's unpredictability. They began to create small rituals, moments that reminded them of their connection. A shared cup of tea in the morning, a brief walk after work, a text at the end of a busy day to simply say, "I saw you today." These gestures were ordinary in themselves, but extraordinary in their consistency and meaning. One evening, while walking through the quiet streets, he noticed a small flower shop. On a whim, he went inside and bought a single rose. Not for a grand occasion, not to express a specific sentiment, but simply to honor the journey that had begun with one long ago. He brought it to her the next day, handing it over with a gentle smile. She took it, a mixture of surprise and warmth lighting her face. The rose symbolized continuity, care, the quiet beauty of shared understanding. They walked together, talking about nothing and everything at the same time. The city moved around them. Cars honked, people hurried past, but within their shared moment, time slowed. It was a simple, ordinary evening, yet it held the weight of months of growing connection, mutual care, and shared humanity. Through these months, they both grew in ways neither expected. He became more patient with himself, more open to joy, and more willing to embrace small moments. She found courage in vulnerability, discovering that sharing struggles could be a source of strength rather than weakness. Together, they learned that life's burdens could be lighter when carried with empathy and understanding. One afternoon, as they sat in a quiet cafe, she spoke about her realization that connection is not about perfection or constant attention. "It's about noticing," she said softly, "being there when it matters, even in small ways." He nodded, understanding completely. "And it's about being patient, about letting life happen while still holding on to those moments that remind us we're not alone." Their bond had matured, no longer fragile or tentative. It had become a steady presence, capable of weathering life's storms. They did not need to define it with labels or promises. The strength lay in shared understanding, small gestures, and a consistent willingness to be present. As weeks turned into months, they continued to navigate life together, sometimes walking side by side, sometimes separated by circumstances, yet always connected in thought and care. The single rose, the small notebook, the quiet smiles, all had become symbols of the power of noticing empathy. In presence, they realized that the most meaningful connections do not always come with drama or spectacle. Often they begin quietly, with a single gesture, a word, or a moment of attention. What matters is the willingness to sustain it, to nurture it with patience, care, and understanding. One evening, after a long walk, they paused on a quiet street. The sky was painted with shades of twilight, soft and comforting. They looked at each other, sharing a silent acknowledgement of the journey they had taken from a single rose, 2 months of growing connection. No words were necessary. The presence, the understanding, and the quiet care spoke louder than anything else. He walked home that night feeling a deep sense of gratitude. Life had brought him challenges, responsibilities, and ordinary moments, yet it had also gifted him this connection. It reminded him that even in the midst of daily struggles, small acts of attention and care could transform lives. She, too, reflected on the day. She had learned that meaningful connection is not about constant proximity or grand gestures. It is about noticing, being present, and caring consistently, even in small ways. The journey had begun with a single rose and had grown into a quiet, enduring bond that enriched both their lives. Months later, they continued to meet, walk, and share small moments. Life remained busy, but the connection they had built endured. It was steady, patient, and resilient, a reminder that meaningful relationships often grow quietly. Nurtured by empathy, understanding, and consistent care, in the end, they understood that one rose had indeed been all it took. Not to create perfection, not to solve every problem, but to open a door that led to presence, understanding, and human connection. And once that door had opened, they had walked through it together, discovering the quiet power of noticing, caring, and being there for each other in the ordinary, beautiful journey of life.